There have been legit millions of YouTube channels that will always talk about, oh, remembrance weapons. So I'm not going to explain what a remembrance weapon is in high detail, but in short, it's basically just a weapon you get from a boss. Or no, you get the remembrance and then you're able to trade it in for 2 items, except for Consort Radahn's where you get 3, which literally 2 of them are the same exact thing. So like it's basically just 2. Also, the title is a little bit of a lie because I won't be really reviewing Consort Radahn's weapons. They have been talked about already so much by so many other YouTubers, but here are my thoughts in short. It should have been a stance, they should have gotten holy damage instead of magic damage, they should have been curved swords, and they should have gotten a blood flame heavy attack. I am very disappointed in these weapons, mainly because you get this amazing boss with a very good moveset, and you could literally incorporate anything into the boss fight, into the weapons, yet you just don't. You just don't. And this also happened with Melania. You have so many insane moves from Melania that the weapon just feels very underwhelming, especially since the skill is not nearly as powerful as when the boss uses it. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts on the weapon. Really disappointing, and honestly a 4 out of 10. They are still good weapons, and if you want to use them, they are viable. But honestly, off of the final boss, it's really disappointing. These weapons aren't actually that bad. These weapons come from the weapon class of the light greatswords. Now, the fact that there's only one really good option in this entire class will lead people to not wanting this weapon. And honestly, you're not really wrong, but at the same time, it's a really fun weapon. It is extremely versatile. I wouldn't really change anything about this weapon, except the weapon itself. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that it is perfect in what it does. It copies the boss's moveset, and honestly, it copies enough to the point where it doesn't feel like too much, yet it also doesn't feel like it's underwhelming. However, at the exact same time, comparing this to something like the Milady, which you get way earlier, you will see the amount of flaws this weapon truly has. Number one of the greatest parts about these light greatswords is their guard counters. You do not get guard counters with this weapon. And you don't even really get any type of block, which is kind of weird considering that almost every other paired weapon gets a block. So it's weird that this weapon doesn't at all. Finally, it's just fully outclassed by the Sword of Night and Flame. Sword of Night and Flame scales better with Faith and Intelligence, so that's going to make the skill go way better. It's easier to find since you don't have to fight a boss for it. It's just better. Like, it's just better. Bar 1, technically Rolana's Twin Blades get more range, and I say technically because the skills get the exact same range. However, let's go back to the skills. Rolana's Twin Blades can technically do more damage. Technically, mainly because you'd have to get the full skill off, and that's what separates the two. Sword of Night and Flame is one individual attack, so it's more likely to hit than Rolana's Twin Blades with all of its attacks. And not to mention, Rolana's Twin Blades don't get any hyper armor, so you can't really trade out with bosses. Oh yeah, let's talk about that loss of hyper armor. These combos are way too long. They are way too long. You could just get hit out of it so easily. So yeah, these weapons are still good. Don't get me wrong. And I have nothing wrong with the weapons themselves. I just switched the weapons entirely, honestly. There's nothing really you could change about this. You made it perfectly suit Rolana. However, the weapons themselves are just not that good. I'd honestly give them a 7 out of 10. And the only reason I'm not giving it a 6.5 out of 10 is because I do genuinely like the moveset. I think the moveset is really fun, but I can't appreciate it enough considering it doesn't have enough hyper armor and it's just outclassed by a lot of different things. The Putrescence Cleaver is an interesting weapon. Now, first of all, when it comes to suiting the boss, I think they did a really good job at suiting the boss, giving it a skill that fits the boss, giving it a proper skill rating, and honestly, I think it does better with an arcane scaling than an int scaling. I heard a lot of people say, oh, this should be a strength and int weapon. Well, if we were to get a strength and int weapon, not only would it probably just scale better with one other stat, however, arcane scales both physical damage and magic damage. So when you have it in the arcane stat, you're just making the AR so absurdly high that this weapon, at max level, could probably clash with the higher great axes, which is absolutely insane. I am glad that they give it frostbite. However, the problem with frostbite itself is the problem with every single other status effect that's implied to certain weapons. They just end up being way lower than weapons that can be infused, which is very weird in my opinion, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. When we talk about the playstyle itself, it gets the normal Great Axe moveset, which is pretty fast for a larger weapon, which I do really like that they made this a Great Axe. It would make no sense being any other weapon type. I hear a lot of people saying, oh, it should have been a different weapon type. Why? Great Axes are some of the strongest weapons in the entire game. Why would you not want this to be a Great Axe? Spinning Guillotine is very confusing to use in battle. Now, it's not hard to understand. It's just kind of getting used to it, because for the weapon itself, you actually have to press the L2 button and the R2 button, which is weird because normally it's either R1 or R2. So this unique change makes it really weird to use in battle, and you do have to get used to the fact that, oh, now you're pressing L2 and R2 instead of R1 and R2. Other than my personal skill issue, it's long, but can do very high damage. It'll be very common for you to see the 4000th number, but now we have to get into the big problem with this skill. It has to compete with Wild Strikes. It is never beating Wild Strikes, which is just a blatant fact. Wild Strikes gets far more hyper armor and can just be infused on better great axes, like the Executioner's Great Axe or the Rusted Anchor. And not to mention, you can also infuse those with Frost, which they're just going to end up getting higher Frost. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, because it's not bad at all. It's just outclassed. It hurts me to say this due to spears being my favorite weapon type in the entire game. They're just way too fun, and some of them can have a high amount of variety. But this spear just really doesn't. Its R1s are normal, but then you get its R2s, which is a throwing attack. Why do you need a throwing attack? This DLC likes to make big uses of throwing attacks, and honestly, they're just usually horrible. They get horrible damage fall off, and they get horrible scalings with them as well. They don't even do high damage when you're close to them, and just normally take longer than regular charge attacks. Also, this is one attack that Mesmer does that is rarely ever used. So why make it his charge attack? Hell, he doesn't even charge up the weapon. He just jumps in the air and throws it. It makes no sense. You know what does make sense though? Him having a spin attack. Because legit in the fight, he winds up a spin attack. So why not use that as the charge attack instead? Not only would it have given the weapon far more variety, but it could have also given it just better speeds with its charge attack. And then make the second attack a poke. That would have been a really cool moveset to have. But no, we get a charge attack because for some reason this DLC just decides, hey, we're not going to amp magic at all. We're not going to help any intelligence builds. Or we're going to make throwing attack builds because we need those, apparently. And I've never understood these types of throwing attacks or why they're in the game. Sure, you can make the argument they can build up poise. Or that they keep poise. But you know what also can do that? Regular throwing knives and kukris. Why would you need a throwing weapon for that that's going to get less stance damage? There's 3 good throwing attacks in this game, and that's about it. The skill's fine, mainly because this is the main attack that people are going to remember from the fight. But guess what? It's still kind of bad because it takes a long time to charge up. So if your opponent is aggressive like every single boss in the entire DLC, you're not going to be able to get this full skill off or the full damage. It's good for PvP though. But I don't really incorporate PvP because I don't play PvP unless it's against friends. And finally, the big thing to put this down, you get it from Mesmer. The best DLC boss, and my second favorite boss in the entire game. It makes no sense as to why it has to be this bad. Especially since the Mesmer's orb is way better. It's arguably one of the best fire attacks, period. And also, you could just get a better version of this weapon. The Mesmer Soldier Spear gets an amazing charge attack. You can infuse it to have a better skill like Flame Spear. And yeah, it's just overall better. Overall, I don't like this weapon. It's outclassed by 2 spears that you can get before it. It doesn't get good negations, even though negations don't really matter. It gets a horrible charge attack. It comes off the best boss in the entire game. You get either this or Mesmer's Orb. And yeah, it's a 5 out of 10. The only reason why I'm not giving it a 4 out of 10 is because against those bosses that aren't too aggressive, you can get the full skill off and do good damage. But otherwise, pick any other fire spear. Trust me, they will do you better. Well, this really changed the tone from one of the most disappointing weapons in the entire DLC to one of the best weapons, period. The Sword Lance is amazing. There's literally nothing I change about it. Number 1, I like the detail that it's a smithing weapon instead of a somber weapon, as Commander Gaius is really the only human boss that we ever fight that's also a remembrance boss. It gives it more variety, especially since this is the best thrusting sword in the entire game. No matter what scaling you choose, it will always get high scalings. Especially with the heavy infusion where it gets a 174 in strength, which is literally one below of being an S tier. That is some of the most insane scaling in the entire game. And guess what? It can get more damage than every single great axe. Yes, that includes the Rusted Anchor, which would make it the strongest pierce weapon in the entire game if colossal swords and colossal weapons never existed. Why? Just why? It didn't need that much. It's a thrusting sword. A thrusting sword. And it gets this much damage along with being a pierce damage weapon. Like what? It also doesn't help that it gets a great spears guard counter. You know, one of the fastest guard counters in the game. Yeah, it needed that. Also something that everyone mentions, but I'm gonna pretend nobody mentions it. It gets built up of a colossal weapon. It's a heavy thrusting sword. You know, one of the fastest movesets for a larger weapon and has some of the best movesets in the entire game. Yeah, this thing apparently needed it. Like, you could have been fine by, like, you know, just giving it regular scalings in terms of status effects, but no, you had to give it colossal weapons. I'm giving this weapon a 10 out of 10. There's really no other way to put it. One of the most fun weapons, has some of the strongest moves in the entire game, and not to mention, it's also off a really good boss. Commander Gaius is honestly overhated, and I'm glad this boss got a really good weapon. I don't really know what to say about this weapon. It's just boring. Like, really boring. It gets a cool skill, sure, but like, why was it not the triple slash? It gets a Guardian War Spear moveset, cool. But the Guardian War Spear can just get more damage, and you can infuse that, so it's going to be automatically better. Oh, it gets slash. So does the Knight Rider's Glaive, and barely any weapon in the game beats out the Knight Rider's Glaive. It doesn't get a lot of rot buildup, only 55, which means it's going to be very hard to proc rot against any boss. I don't know, it's just really bland and boring. And unironically, there's one step that they could make to make this one of the best halberds in the entire game. Just give it a downward slash for its charge attack. Then it could have the perfect halberd moveset, which would automatically make it an A tier. But I don't know. It doesn't excite me like any other weapon. I wish it got deadly rot, I guess? I don't know, just give it a 6. Man, this weapon looks so fucking cool. Like, out of all the DLC boss weapons, this is easily the coolest looking. If we were going based off of design, this would easily be like a high S tier. Look at this thing. This thing looks so sick. It honestly looks like it could be 2 weapon types in one. It looks that good. And that's where basically all the positives stop. Well, not really, because it does get the Claymore moveset, which is the best greatsword moveset. But At that point, why not just use the claymore? Let's start with the skill. In PvP, this skill's great. But in regular game, it's not that good, especially considering it does the same exact damage as a charge attack, but a charge attack is going to be way better because not only is it faster, but you get a faster recovery. So yeah, just the charge attack is way better than the skill itself. It also doesn't help that this is split holy damage, which, yeah, it's not that high, but at the same time, you're going to notice it's not doing the best on bosses like Radagon and Elden Beast. And keep in mind, I had 3 talismans buffing this weapon. It also doesn't help that it has to compete with holy greatswords like Ordovus Greatsword and the Sacred Relic Sword. Both of these options are just leagues better in every single way. Is this weapon bad? No. However, it just has nothing that stands out about it except for its design. Which honestly, just for its design, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. It's still a viable weapon, but it's just way too unreliable and is outclassed by a lot of other things. This weapon, on the other hand, oh my god, this weapon's phenomenal. Not only does it look cool, I love the unique design of it. It's literally just a sunflower. And it looks beautiful. It is off the worst boss in the game aside from Mater, but that's really the worst thing I can say about this weapon. Otherwise, this weapon's amazing. It gets the great charge attack that the Blood Fiend's arm has, which is just straight up the best charge attack in the entire game. This means it also gets the amazing guard counters that the Blood Fiend's arm gets. Now granted, the Blood Fiend's arm is going to be better because it can be infused. However, unlike Midra's sword, this skill is so fun to use and does really high damage. Like, really high damage. And you get a bunch of hyper armor during it too, so you're never going to be hit out of this skill. If you have the right buffs for it, which sadly I did not, this weapon skill absolutely destroys bosses. And it's a wholly damaging weapon. Now, yes, it scales better with faith than it does strength, but you can still find great use by leveling the strength stat. I'm giving this weapon a 9 out of 10. This weapon is absolutely amazing, and literally the only reason it is not a 10 out of 10 is because the Blood Fiend's arm exists, which literally gets more damage with a faith infusion. Which is really sad. I genuinely want this weapon to be like the best colossal weapon in the entire game, just because it looks so cool. But yeah, the most I can give it is a 9, sadly. But it's a very, very high 9. It's not a low 9 at all. Finally, I can say this weapon is an amazing weapon. You know why? Because they finally fixed the bug where this thing doesn't work with the Shard of Alexander. It finally works with the Shard of Alexander and just makes the skill that much better. Yeah, Mater's Finger's amazing. There's literally nothing I can say bad about it. Now, yes, the boss is bad, but that's the biggest extent I can go to saying this weapon's bad. First of all, the charge attack. Yes, it's not the fastest charge attack, but it still gets high stance damage, and not to mention, you can duck under attacks, which is very helpful against bosses like Consort Radon and Radagon, who do usually high swings for some reason. And the skill, it's phenomenal. Not only can it hit 3 times, because the weapon itself gets a hitbox, but it just does a lot of holy damage. Think of the Sacred Relic Sword, but on a lower scale. This does holy tons of damage. This does so much damage. Even while being a holy Ash of War, it does amazing damage against everything. Even against Radagon, it's not too shabby. And against bosses that are not wholly resistant at all, like Commander Gaius, it's going to be absolutely insane against them. Now I kind of have to get to a bad part. I did lie a little bit earlier by saying, oh, there's nothing bad about the weapon. But there is one thing, and it is a huge nitpick. The weapons get different scalings. The physical attacks of the weapon do magic, while the skill does holy. Easy 10 out of 10. Easy 10 out of 10. Amazing skill. Amazing charge attack. Amazing guard counter. It just has everything going for it. Now, I know none of you want me to make like this huge conclusion where I'm just like, oh, this weapon goes here, this weapon goes here. So instead, I'm just going to show you a list. That's my list. Please comment down below if you disagree with anything or want me to make more videos like this. Anyway, see you.